When is it too early to start planning for next year's garden? Well, there's lots of different theories, and the answer is whenever you feel it's time to start planning for next year's garden, that means it's time to start planning for next year's garden. Whether you want to start your compost during the spring and summer, or you want to start planning what kind of vegetables or what kind of plants that you want to put into that garden. Whenever you decide you're going to sit down and start planning it out, that's when it's time. So this is what natural compost looks like. You move your leaves aside and you've got this black mush underneath and this deep, dark soil. As this is one of the places that they blow the leaves and leave the leaves, being surrounded by woods and trees. This natural compost is something I didn't have to work for. However, this pile here, I'm going to be working for. When you make compost, a quick, easy way is to wet it once a day and turn it until it dissolves into something that looks a bit more like that. Or even this. Now, if you dig underneath, you can see the regular clay soil in comparison to this. Now, it's one of the best fertilizers that is naturally made for your garden. As you can see, I put a scoop with each of the pepper sets and potato sets, as well as the cabbage and both of the tomatoes. This is the compost pile after a day of adding to it. I also moved the strawberry planter slightly closer to the garden and put a little mud in there to keep the stuff from flying away. So Ember, could you tell me what that pile is right there?
It's compost before it comes to compost.
How do we make it compost?
We put it in a spot and we put worms in there. And then the worms poop it out. Ah!
Well, is it also possible for the leaves and everything that's in there to break down on their own from being wet and turned?
Halfway. But the rest would be
The worm's job?
Run, go.
So how is composting different than vermiculture?
Because it's a lot quicker. Oh no.
So what are we doing over in this cozy corner, Ember?
We're making compost.
What kind of compost?
Compost that you can feed it to your plant.
How are we making the compost?
With some leftover scraps
And
dirt and worms.
what do the worms do to make compost?
They just basically eat all the food in there and poop it out.
And what does their poop do?
Nutrients this way to like cow manure.
Does it also add a beneficial bacteria? Help you catch the wormies. You're doing a good job. You've got 3. Go get them in their bucket. Go get them in their bucket.
Mommy,
What?
this boy reminds me of my bandage worm.
Okay.
The ones that I had as a pet.
Now give them some of the food down here. It's always a good idea to water not only your compost to help it break down, but your vermiculture pits. Vermiculture is where you keep worms in a container and you feed them compostable substances, and they eat it and they make worm castings. A little child-size watering can of water in a container that's filled about up to here, a quarter of the way up a container that's quite large. So you don't need a lot of water, you just need to keep it nice and moist so the worms do not dehydrate themselves. Now just for a comparison, I'm about 5'9", and this trash bucket is about half my size. Making compost is a very good way to get cheap fertilizer for almost nothing. The only thing you need is time, water, and physical labor. You take your kitchen waste, your yard waste, you throw it in a pile. You wet it, you turn it, you wet it, you turn it, and as it breaks down, it becomes compost. Another way to compost is called vermiculture, in which case you feed worms, and the worms will eat the leaves or pieces of wood or old food, and they'll, pardon the term, but they'll poop. And that poop is added fertilizer. Not exactly compost, but what do you think happens inside the stomach of a worm? Food's digested and broken down into smaller pieces. And those smaller pieces can be used in your garden. It's the same concept as compost. When you compost something, then it'll break down and become part of your soil. And that part of your soil will feed your plants by feeding your soil. It'll get a whole miniature ecosystem happening inside your soil, which will keep the soil rich with nutrients and feed your plants.